Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. During the 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country due to COVID-19, the Reagan Foundation switched to virtual programming to ensure that we were still delivering world-class content, even if you couldn't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. Now that the Reagan Library Museum is back open, we are holding hybrid programming, whereby some are in person and some are virtual. We hope you enjoyed this virtual event. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you best-selling author and former MSNBC Hardball host, Chris Matthews. Chris Matthews has been following American politics since the first Eisenhower campaign. Following 2 post-college years in the Peace Corps, Chris served on several staffs on Capitol Hill. He traveled down Pennsylvania Avenue to serve as a White House speechwriter to President Carter before returning to the Hill as a senior aide to House Speaker Tip O'Neill. That means that Chris saw up close the defining friendships of American history, the friendship of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. In the late 1980s, Chris switched to full-time journalism, serving as Washington bureau chief for the San Francisco Examiner, and then beginning his career on television in 1994. In all the years Chris has been involved in the country's public life, he's kept an abiding faith in electoral politics, his quadrennial hope that the American people will make the best judgment on who should lead. He has kept that faith through war and peace, good times and bad, through great leaders and not so great. He has never lost his vigorous love of democracy and how it can serve to make this country, through all of its challenges, a more perfect union. He joined us today to discuss his brand new book, This Country, My Life in Politics and History, a sweeping memoir of American politics and history. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program with Chris Matthews, coming to you from our Leadership Academy Oval Office, joined in conversation by Reagan Foundation Institute Executive Director John Heybusch.
We have with us today Chris Matthews, someone America instantly recognizes, someone who played an incredibly important role in the life of numerous critically important politicians in the United States, including President Ronald Reagan. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation to have with Chris, who's been here to the Reagan Library several times. And welcome, Chris. It's great to be with you.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you.
Chris, you have written, I think now, 9 books, 6 of them bestsellers. And I have to say, I've read a couple of your books before. This one feels like it has the tone of perhaps this is your last, or it may be not your last, but it's one that you felt like, boy, I have got to write this one before I head to the pearly gates. Is that right?
Well, that's pretty, that's the voice of doom there. But yeah, it does sort of cover my whole life. And I always wanted to tell the irony, what's the right word? The serendipity of my life. You mentioned it, but all those jobs I had, working in Congress, working for Tip O'Neill when President Reagan was president, covering the fall of the Berlin Wall and of the Iron Curtain itself, and the first elections in South Africa, the deals up in Northern Ireland that President Reagan had a role in between the Catholics and the Protestants. I mean, there's so many ways that I was watching him as I was living my life. You're right. And so I wanted to write about it because my life had followed this arc of seeing change, really, seeing the hiding under my school desk at St. Christopher's School in Philadelphia, wary that the Russian long-range bombers were going to drop atom bombs on us, and praying that this might not be the end of the world, and praying for the conversion of Russia at Mass every Sunday, and rescuing or ransoming pagan babies from Red China in school for $5. You always were the star of the class, and rooting for the Hungarians in 1956 against the Warsaw Pact tanks, and rooting initially for Castro, and then finding out that he was a double crosser, that he was not a liberal Democrat, he was not for democracy, he was a red ally basically from the beginning. a lot of us people later on didn't understand that, but we thought he was really cool because he had thrown Batista, a corrupt tyrant, out of office. We thought, oh my God, we've got a real democratic leader here. He came to New York. He did interviews with Edward R. Murrow. He told us he was not a communist. The one person who knew he was Nixon. Nixon saw right through him, and it drove Castro crazy. He said, that damn Nixon, he knew me and figured me out. So I saw it all. And then when I was the Peace Corps in Africa in the 60s, I lived in a small country right across the border from South Africa. And I read the South African newspapers and listened to the SABC radio stations. And I was watching the whole craziness of that country where they could have advanced science with Christian Bernard doing the first heart transplant, and also having these ridiculous morality laws to try to keep the races apart. And it wasn't working, obviously. And I saw that change. So I saw a lot of things beginning one way and ending up another way, including Northern Ireland. My parents, when they got married, were Catholic and Protestant. My dad's mother was an Orange woman all the way, a Presbyterian from Northern Ireland. She was an immigrant. That family, that wedding was very small, John. There weren't many Catholics coming to the Protestant wedding and Protestant coming to the Catholic. They got married at the Navy Chapel where my father was in the Navy in Philadelphia. And but I saw that come together. I was rooting for it all the way. I wanted the two religions to get along and share that country's leadership and not try to kill each other. In fact, that's what they were doing, killing each other. So I got to see a lot of good change.
Yeah, Chris, you're still a remarkably important contemporary news figure in the United States. And it's just hard for me to believe or imagine that, you got your interest in politics, your start in politics in a way, as I read in the book. You went to see Newsreels with your dad, maybe at the movie theater. And, and thinking about you in those times, it's little hard to place you that way. But I brought something along that I thought I'd show you because I know this is something that it struck right at your heart at a certain important part of your life. It did to me as well, and it's what got me interested in politics. I was a newspaper boy for the Evening Star, and I thought I know you will remember this headline, Chris. Yeah, I saved this.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, does this bring back some real memories for you? I'm not sure. You must have been in your early...
I was in Montreal that weekend. A friend of mine, like some people were in those days, certainly not me, were looking for jobs up in Canada to get out of the draft. And I said, I'll go out with you for the weekend. And I remember we were going around from bar to bar trying to find a TV set that would show us the Gene McCarthy, Bobby Kennedy debate. And so we fit. As I've often in my life, I found myself in the face of nationalism. A Canadian bartender said, "You people come in here and want us to watch your channel. We want to watch." He was watching Lawrence Welk. It wasn't like the Canadian network. He just didn't want to watch the debates. So I was sort of praying for Bobby then, although I'd been rooting for Gene McCarthy, both anti-war candidates, and I really wanted Bobby to win because I thought he could end the war. Of course, nobody could end the war probably unless we just pulled out in 1969. The only way we could have won, I guess, is to lose, just walk out and say, we did. I think it was George Aiken, the senator from Vermont, who said, just declare victory and leave. Say we did what we did. That was a little bit ridiculous. But I was blown away by the Bobby Kennedy, because Bobby Kennedy's death was just sad. It was just tragic. There was no glamour. Jack Kennedy's death was this terrible beauty, this unbelievable funeral, just gorgeous funeral. It's hard to say, the boots riding backwards on the saddle. De Gaulle, Haile Selassie, the leaders that showed up from around the world was amazing. And Bobby was just a slow train ride from New York to Washington, a sad train with people black and white lining along the train side. And that's to me my politics. My politics are a combination of liberal and somewhere to the right. I try to put it together. I believe in police. I don't believe in defunding the police. I believe in police. When you dial 911, you want a good, courageous cop to show up. You do not want a scared cop, a cop afraid of too much wokeness. You want a cop that's there to do his or her job. And that means showing guts in the face of danger. And you want them there. So anybody wants to defund 911, it's crazy. In other words, you want a busy signal? Is that what you want when you dial 911? And people who live in tough neighborhoods, older minority people, they're the ones who know they live in a tough neighborhood in some cases. They want the police doing their job. They want somebody on that street with them and coming to their help. So I think Bobby Kennedy was right. He was tough on bad guys, but he was also compassionate. He was both. He had sympathy for people born to tough circumstances, but he had no time for crooks.
I picked up in your writing several chapters in the book. You refer to, I think, a central theme in the way you looked at life. And I wonder if you got it from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it was his quote that said, "Always do what you're afraid to do." And maybe, I don't know if you read Emerson, but you sure seem
I know that is from Emerson. And that was a Bobby Kennedy quote that he had underlined in his book that John Glenn found after Bobby was dead. He was going through Bobby's book collection when he took his kids home to Virginia for the family after the assassination. And he found that quote in the book. And he found it in one of Bobby's books and underlined it, the line from Ralph Waldo Emerson you mentioned. Always do what you're afraid to do. Well, certainly most of our lives, I think, are a combination of about three things. Resenting or regretting not doing something we might have done that would have shown some real courage, but we didn't do it because we're afraid the leap was too wide, too far to jump. You're jumping over a cliff. You're not going to, it can scare the heck out of you. And the other one is failing to remember the leaps you did take. And most people who bring families up and provide for families deserve some credit for the leaps they've taken in their lives, because they do. They moved neighborhoods. They put their kids in better schools than they could have afforded. They moved to houses they couldn't afford. They married somebody that they had to really work to get married with. They had to really try to win this person over. But there's also, the crashes when you take a big leap and you crash. I mean, life is filled with peril, and you got to measure when to jump and when not to jump. And I think I know that I wouldn't have had my life if I hadn't had the Peace Corps in Africa. If I hadn't gone to Capitol Hill after I came home and knocked on doors till I finally got a job. If I hadn't ran for Congress, and even though I lost a primary against the Philadelphia political machine, Democratic machine, I made a lot of friends. People looked up to me after I ran. I made friends with the old boss, Senator Moss from Utah, and people knew that I'd done it, and they were impressed with it. People in politics like people who have the guts to run for office. They like each other, even the other party, because it takes guts to run for office. It's very Churchillian when you come down to it, to stand alone and say, I'm going to run for this or that. And I don't care how many people make fun of me or think I'm too big for my shoes or something. And going on television when I did, I was scared as a kid in school all the way through college to stand up and give a speech, petrified of public speaking. I was almost as petrified of writing. So I forced myself to write. One way, if anybody's listening about this particular thing, here's a learning kit class. If you want to learn to write, get a job that has a deadline, because you have to write on deadline. You have to write. So you can't fiddle around with something for 3 days. You have to have it in by a certain hour. And if it's in, it's probably okay. It's probably okay. There's something about pressure that makes you a better writer. And the same with public speaking. The only way to get over it, like playing the piano, practice, because the more time you stand in front of a group talking about what you know about, the less a big deal it is, because you feel just as comfortable. In fact, you sometimes wish you were up there speaking instead of some other knucklehead. You'd rather be doing the talking than the listening. So I got hooked on that. And when I was working for Speaker O'Neill, I accepted every free speech, every $200 speech. Anybody that wanted me to talk to a classroom, presidential classroom, up close, any of those organizations that bring young people to Washington, I was there. I'd find an hour to get over there. And eventually I didn't get nervous anymore. And I used to, my knees would knock. I was scared to death to give speeches. And I think I'm still over it. I think I can still do it.
Now, I want to talk to you about the word ask, because you make a point in your book, Chris, that when you do run for office, that's what the art is all about. You have to ask. Then when you ran for the seat in Philadelphia and lost, I wondered, did you reach a turning point in your life where you thought, my life is still going to be about asking, but it's not asking people for their vote. It's asking tough questions. Is that how your
Well,
life
that's
turned?
interesting. I never thought of that. But the ask, I always tell people that if you have a dream job or any dream or for any job, maybe just a job, nobody's coming to your door, knocking on the door and say, I hear you like the job. It doesn't happen. You have to go knock on their door and hope that 1 out of 10 will say yes, but you only need 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100. All you need is one. That's the magic of asking. This Southern congressman who didn't hire me because I talked too fast, my hair was too long, and he was much more conservative than me. He said, I used to sell insurance door to door. And it's just like politics. He said, you go to 100 doors, usually the woman is at home during the daytime, and she invites you back to meet her spouse, her husband. And of those 9 that invite you back, 9 out of 100, he's very precise about this, 3 will buy the policy. So to sell those 3, you have to meet with 9 couples. And to meet with those 9 couples, you have to knock on 100 doors. But it's simple math. And it's like dating. I mean, how many times do you date somebody who's just not interested in you? And how many times are you interested? They're not, or they might be, but you're not. So you find the golden reality where you're both pretty interested. And that's called a marriage, if you're lucky. So, I mean, it's all a question of numbers and percentages. It sounds sort of stupidly simple, but it is true. And also, as Machiavelli taught us, and as Ben Franklin taught us, if you want to make a friend, ask someone for a favor. And once somebody's done a favor for you, or they're hiring you, or whatever, they're going to be loyal to you. It's just a fact. Oh yeah, I gave her the first job, or I gave him his first job, or I promoted him, or that person is your ally. So you get 2 for the price of 1. You get the job and you get an ally if you get a job from somebody. And behind every door you're trying to get through, there's somebody with their hand on that doorknob. And you better connect with that person or you're not getting through. It's tough. It's tough for minorities. It's tougher for women. Maybe still tougher for women, less so than it was, but definitely still tougher for minorities. But it's doable if you just ask enough people to get the right one. And then asking on TV, I decided, John, at the beginning of Hardball, that this is back in the 90s, I said, I am going to ask the question 3 times to get the answer. I'm there for the voter, for the viewer. And my job is to get the question asked that they would ask. I mean, Sam Donaldson was good at this for ABC. Just ask the question the average person is dying to know the answer to, and don't skip it because you're the only one that gets to do it. And you're there for them. You're not there for the politician. He's going to, or she's going to give you the best possible case for them. I mean, I tell you, one thing I know about politics, right, left, and center, every politician has it down how great they are. They will tell you how great they are. They will give you the best possible argument about why they're there, their motives, their purposes, who they are, how they got there. So you got to get through that. You got to get into the questions that they don't want to ask about. And I've had some great luck with that with Donald Trump. I got into a big fight with Zell Miller one Notorious Night when he wanted to challenge me to a duel. But my favorite was with a guy, I remember his name, but I'm not going to say it, a young guy in his early 30s who was a DJ, a talk jock, and he was attacking the Democrats for being appeasers. So on a hunch, I asked him, so what was appeasement? He had no idea. He didn't know it was the French and British and Neville Chamberlain and the French giving away the Sudetenland, the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. He had no idea what he was talking about. So, and then I asked Trump, not to go into a Trump fest here, but I asked him, what should be done to a woman who chooses to have an abortion? And he said, well, she'd have to be punished. He had no idea what the pro-life position is. The pro-life position, when you consider it consistent or not, is the doctor should have his license removed or something like that, or fine. It's never about the woman. And but he didn't know that. Nobody clued him in on that. They just said pro-life means anti-abortion, therefore say it a lot. And people, the conservative people, and people with those values, which are good values, will be with you. And so he just didn't know what he was talking about. That's what I really like to do, is catch somebody not knowing what they're talking about, because that's fun. And it's my job. It's entertaining, but it's educational. They don't like it at all, though. They don't come back, these people. They don't count on them coming back for the next show. But the trouble with today is nobody wants their own side cross-examined. You're only supposed to do this to the other side politically. So you get, there's so many shows where people get a free ride every time they go on. And that's why they do those shows, because they're going to get pandered to instead of questioned. Cross-examination is brutal, because you're going against what a person suggests is the truth. And you're saying, yeah, you say that's the truth, but what about this? And what about that? Nobody likes that, because you're getting into their honesty.
Yeah. I want to ask your advice for young people, Chris, because in your book you talked about, listen, here's how I got a job on Capitol Hill, and I was interested in politics. I wanted to get into politics. You did what I did. You just wore out shoe leather. You went from door to door to door. You knocked and knocked and knocked, and you asked. Finally, you got a job. Is that, if somebody was interested in politics today, is that what you tell them to do? All right, go to Capitol Hill and hit the hallways.
Well, you can do that, or if it's in political season, like it's the springtime or late winter, I'd try to find somebody you've been reading about in the paper that you like the cut of their jib. There's something about them you like, and go work in their campaign. You know, if you got enough money, a few $100 to get you through, and they'll find you a place to stay usually, and you can do it on the cheap. But there's no experience like it. And secondly, you'll earn a slot in that person's office if they win. That's the best way to come in with them. I mean, there's no doubt. The best way to come in with a politician is to come in with them, you know. And that's one way. The other is it's harder today because of the security and all this 9/11 stuff. You can't go around with a resume pile. I was walking around fancy free with a pile of resumes, going up to receptionist, usually a woman, and saying, have you got a legislative assistant job open? Or do you know any? And then I'd say, do you hear one? Anybody talking? Any scuttlebutt among the receptionists? I don't think you can do that today without somebody coming up to you and say, who are you? What are you doing here? Oh, you should go to the personnel office, to some bureaucracy. Good luck. Good luck. But it was a freer time. This terrorism, domestic and foreign, mostly foreign, has really curtailed our freedoms just to move around. You used to be able to walk into the Capitol and you could walk around, and now you have to go to the visitor center. Instead of being a citizen, you're now a visitor. No, you're not. This is your Congress. You shouldn't be called a visitor. You should be called it's like the word homeland. I never liked the word homeland. But what else would we be defending? Civil defense. Why don't we just say civil defense? It's us. We don't have to say it sounds like motherland or fatherland. It sounds totalitarian to me. I don't like the sound of it. I'm sorry. That's my politics. Just call it civil defense.
Yeah, well, speaking of terrorism and civil defense and the police and the rest of it, I think people would really be surprised to learn your first job on Capitol Hill. It wasn't as a legislative assistant. I mean, surprise some people who haven't read your book, Chris. What was your first job on the Hill?
From a top aide to the senator from Utah, Frank Moss, a great guy, they didn't have an open job, so they said in those days, you could appoint people to the mailroom, to the elevator jobs, to whatever, to the police. And a lot of law students went through law school, like George Washington or Georgetown that way. Usually those are people with political connections. Their daddy had some clout, and the senator wanted to help take care of them. But in my case, it was just a way to get in the door. And so I'd work in the office from around 11 in the morning. I'd take the bus up to Capitol Hill, the 33, I think it was. I'd get there, which went right by the White House in those days. The White House, it used to be, as I was saying a moment ago, you could drive right by the White House. It was all open on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I'd work there in the office answering complicated letters. And then I'd finally get there, about 20 minutes to 3, I'd put on my uniform and my .38 special, my revolver they only put 5 bullets in it, John, because they're afraid we might trip and shoot off around somewhere.
For the Capitol Police, right?
Yeah, well, the scariest part of that, the cops are much more serious now. I had a week of training, which I still remember some things from. But the most dangerous part of my job wasn't the job. It was going to dinner around 6:30 at night in the middle of my shift. I'd just go prancing up, Southeast Pennsylvania Avenue, the tougher part of town. Not very tough, but it was dicier back then. The crime rate was pretty high back then. And murder rate was high. And there I am walking along with my Marty Milner costume and I act like I'm a real cop. And with a gun, if it had been a robbery of one of the stores or restaurants along there, I don't know what I'd have done, lie on the ground and say I'm not a real cop, because the people would have said, "Officer, get this guy." And the bad guy would be looking at me with my gun in my holster and say, "I'm going to get that guy." I don't that hitchhiking through Africa was nothing as scary as that. I mean, all the stuff I've done. That was the idiot. I should have brought my lunch or taken. I don't know how. I just wanted to get a good hot meal around 6:30 at night, like most people like. And I wanted to go get some pork chops and applesauce at this little restaurant bakery on the hill. And what I was taking were unbelievable. But everybody thought I was a real cop. I sat next to a guy at a counter one time and said, "I really respect police officers." He's getting this big, heavy message to me. I felt like I said, "You know what? I'm a college guy. I was in grad school. I was in the Peace Corps. I'm not who you think I am.
Yeah.
I'm this guy with a uniform on." But that was part of getting in the door. Within a few months, John, I had a legislative assistant job, the one I wanted.
I as amateurish as you paint your role to be, Chris, I bet you it still struck you kind of special and maybe really, really ugly to watch those January 6th events and the Capitol Police and what happened.
I felt violated. I felt like our country, it's our cathedral of democracy. It's where it all happened. I remember one night, John, I had the late shift from 3 to 11, as I said. And sometimes you get interesting postings in the night. And I get posted in the rotunda in the dark. So there I am sitting in the dark in 1971. Think about what had happened there 8 years before, where John Kennedy was laid out. And, de Gaulle and everybody came, and Haile Selassie, as I said, and Jacqueline Kennedy and the whole family. And the pictures, we all grew up seeing those pictures. And there, I try to summon it back. You can't summon it back. I mean, it's the past, but you keep that spot. And that's when Lincoln gave his second inaugural address, explaining the horror of slavery. I'm sorry, the horror of the Civil War, where we lost 600,000 guys shooting at point blank range across the field together. They're all Christians mostly. They're all Americans. They all speak English. They all grew up in this country. They're shooting their rifles at each other with not even any foxholes, just killing each other. And Lincoln, how do you explain that to the American people? And he stood there on the steps of that Capitol and said, it's biblical. It may be biblical punishment for slavery. What was done by the whip will have to be paid for by the sword. He tried to explain to a Christian, and mostly Christian, Judeo-Christian country, that there may be something in this that we ought to learn from. That this is something profound. It isn't just an accident. Slavery wasn't an accident. Civil War wasn't an accident. These were things that happened to us mainly by our own doing. And to the credit of the Union forces, they really did. A lot of these young guys gave their lives to end slavery. To me, that's reparations. I mean, I think there's a hell of a lot of reparations going on in the 1860s that nobody gives credit to. These people paid a horrible price, as he said, the last best bit of devotion to their country. And but I felt about it. That's where they passed the Civil Rights Bill. That's where they debated slavery before. That's where all of our history, Democratic, Republican history is there in that building. And they go in there acting like idiot clowns, wearing horns and climbing up the walls. And I mean, they didn't do graffiti. I know they wasn't that bad, but I always would think that the worst things don't happen. If Watergate had gone on, how far would it have gotten? I don't think it's the worst thing ever happened in our history, Watergate, but I tell you, it might have gotten to be that way if President Nixon and his henchmen, like Haldeman, thought they could get away with anything. I don't know. But in this case, what would they have done if they'd gotten Mitt Romney, that crowd? What would they have done if they got Mike Pence, the vice president, who wasn't playing ball with them? What would they have done? I don't know. They would have humiliated him? I don't know, poured something on him? Would they have not hurt him? Would they beat him? They did stuff to those policemen that was horrendous. Jamming flagpoles into these guys. And I mean, there were deaths that day. And I don't know what would have happened if that thing hadn't been shut down, that riot when it was. Because if they got Pelosi, I don't know. But if I were a member of Congress, I'd be thinking right now what they would have done, how bad that got. And they thought they were operating under the leadership of a president. They thought they were doing what the president wanted them to do. So I felt violated as a former cop up there, as a former policeman. I still treasure the picture, the video. You've seen it, everybody watching has seen that African-American policeman leading that mob in the wrong direction so they won't get to Mitt Romney. At the first I thought he was just scared of the crowd. Then I realized what was going on. I was explained that this guy was doing the God's work here. He was getting those bad people away from the good people, Yeah.
You mentioned Lincoln's address on the steps of the Capitol, and it reminds me of your role, one of your critically important roles as a speechwriter. And it seemed like, Chris, a lot of your life you aspired to the role of speechwriter. You became a speechwriter for President Carter. Why was the role of speechwriter attractive to you as opposed to like a policy job where you could become, an assistant secretary or that sort of thing? What is it about a speechwriter role?
I guess I'm a lightweight. That's a really good question, because I always thought, well, I guess because Ted Sorensen, I remember being on the Rhodesian Railway and an overnight, talk about a romantic trip. I'm here in a Rhodesian Railroad riding through Africa in the night. And you're all alone. There's pictures of animals on the wall, big posters of lions and elephants, and you're looking out the window, and it's like out of Africa, and I'm reading a paperback of Ted Sorensen's book called Kennedy, about his boss Jack Kennedy and how he had served with him as a legislative assistant on the Hill, as a Senate aide, a young guy, and this young Senator Jack Kennedy, and I thought I can do that. Especially when a guy had gone to Holy Cross, my college, a couple of years ahead of me, wrote me a letter, and he was working for Senator Gurney from Florida, a Republican. And he said, I had left law school to work here. And I realized, hey, I can do this without being a lawyer. I can do this job. And that was a big breakthrough for me. I said, well, maybe I could, because I'd been in economics in grad school at Chapel Hill at University of North Carolina. I didn't do a law degree, but that gave me an opening. I guess I've always, it's that thing we were talking about, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Writing wasn't easy for me, and I wanted to be a writer. But I always had this hunch that I could be a speechwriter. Talk about, what's the right word? Overconfidence, but I had it. I just thought I could write speeches. I don't know why I did, but I thought I could. And I did. I became, I was on the plane with President Carter until the last dog died, as Bill Clinton would say. We were on it all night, election night, when we got the word at 1:00 in the morning in Seattle that Reagan was going to beat us. Ronald Reagan was going to beat us by 10 points. I think it wasn't quite that bad eventually, but all that Carter said, and he was obviously emotionally taken by it, not very happy about it. He's broken by it, I think. He said, don't tell Rosalind, I'll tell her. That's the only instruction he gave us. Don't tell my wife, I'll tell her. And we flew into Georgia, into Plains, and I remember looking up at this old train depot through its window, and I saw him telling his wife he'd lost. I mean, it's just, politics are high stakes. You get rejected by the American people. They know you for 4 years, they know you, and then they reject you. It takes a lot of guts to take the risk, and it takes, I think, a lot of patriotism to accept your loss and walk off the stage. Our best leaders have done it, and great people like, Al Gore wasn't the coolest guy in the world, but he had a lot of guts the way he took that loss after the Supreme Court intervened. Hillary Clinton, you don't have to like her to respect the fact that she got up the next morning after being totally upset by that election. She thought she had it in the bag. And to know that she had just lost Pennsylvania, blue collar state, had lost Michigan, had lost Wisconsin. These are not right-wing red states. And she'd lost them. She had lost them. And yet she got up at this cheap hotel, the Pennsylvania Hotel across from Penn Station in New York, and she took it. She said, I lost. And Adlai Stevenson gave the greatest speech. Stevenson once said, when he lost to General Eisenhower, he said, I'm too old to cry, but it hurts too much to laugh. And he was quoting Lincoln. No, it is to me the essential unwritten rule of our form of government, which is the loser has to face up. Dick Nixon, with all the people that don't like him, with good reason. I never was a Nixon hater, but Nixon, he had a big case to make. He could have argued that he had won Chicago, or not Chicago, but he didn't lose that badly in Chicago, that the mob had taken from him. A lot of dead people were recorded voting that day, and Daley had burned all the ballots the next day. And Texas was definitely a tricky matter because they had no recall provision or no recount provision in their constitution. There was no way to check even Jack Kennedy called his running mate and vice president, Landslide Lyndon, he called him Landslide because he had won his seat in the Senate with 87 votes or something. And he always thought that was questionable, to put it lightly. And yet Nixon agreed to meet with Kennedy in Key Biscayne, Florida. They sat down. Nixon invited him out to a little cabana behind the Key Biscayne Hotel, where they sat there drinking Cokes. And Nixon formalized the whole thing. He made Nixon Kennedy president. He did the absolute right thing. And even Ted Kennedy, after Dick Nixon had died, he gave him credit for having handled it so graciously. Because Nixon had a case, but he knew that to win, he would take months and months and months. It probably wouldn't change the results, and it would interrupt our leadership at the time of the Cold War. And he did the right thing for the country. People are complicated. I wish I could explain that about life to people. They're complicated, not all bad or all good. It's just everybody's amazingly good at certain times, and bad at certain times.
Yeah, and Chris, politics is so deep with emotions and symbols. And I remember you were out here at the Reagan Library for our debates in 2012. I was standing next to you, and you went up and you went through the same Air Force One that you flew aboard many, many times. And I sensed you got real emotional because that was a time in your life that was
John,
just so important.
That was the actual plane. As they called the equipment. That was the actual plane. Fred Ryan explained that to me. He said, and I remember I went over, sat in the seat I was sitting in, the staff section, right next to the window, next to Jody Powell, believe it or not. I was not that big a deal as Jody Powell and the press secretary. And that's where I kept getting the phone calls the evening before the election from Patrick Cadell, the president's pollster. And he was obviously about to tell the bad news because he was following it all day. He was doing his polling. So that was it. I love that plane, the old Air Force One that's at the Reagan Library. It's a different world when you get on that plane. You're maybe losing like we were, and yet when you get back on that plane, you smell the steaks cooking. It's around supper time, and you're really tired, and the steaks are cooking. You can smell them, and you go, "Oh, this is going to be whatever else is going on. This is going to be fun." They had if you look at the pictures of me in the book, you see our cigarettes sitting on the table. We just openly smoking cigarettes on an airplane.
Yeah, a big ashtray on that table.
No, it's unbelievable. Yeah. I think my Salem's or somebody had Salem's or something, or Newport's, whatever. And the casual effrontery of a staffer just lighting up when Air Force One. It's unimaginable. They used to do that, by the way, here in the locker room of NFL games. The players would light up during the halftime. I mean, it's different attitudes about health. But there was Hershey Kisses or something on a plate, or peanuts. There's these little snacks, and if you wanted to drink a Coke or something, you just said, or wine, you just said to the military, "Can I have a white wine?" That's how life. It was very luxurious, and also you're writing on a Selectric 2 typewriter, and you're knocking out speeches like 45-degree angle because the plane's taken off. An Air Force plane just goes right up, and you're knocking out note cards for the president to give maybe at the next stop. How can you beat that? I mean, that was my favorite job.
Yeah, I could sense that in the book. And now, in that race, the Carter-Reagan race, 1980, Chris, you go into the debate, and I wanted to ask you if you felt that Reagan closed the deal with the American people in that debate and won it that way? Or do you feel like, even before the debate, that race was lost because of the hostages in the economy?
Well, it depends whose pollster you're looking at. Cadell thought we were still winning. You ask yourself, just use logic, why did Reagan agree to debate? The last week, that weekend, that debate in Cleveland, why did he agree to it if he was passing Carter? If he was moving ahead dynamically, I wouldn't have debated. Apparently made the decision to debate, I've heard, at the Al Smith dinner when Carter was so stiff and so uncomedic, and Reagan was cool and graceful, because that's an occasion to do some self-deprecation and to take some light shots at your opponent. But it's supposed to be a gentlemanly affair. It's not supposed to be ripping apart your opponent. And Carter did play it. He didn't play it right. And President, as you know, knows all how it can charm an audience anywhere. And so I thought the debate run, I think there you go again, is one of those lines that Reagan used at night that people will never understand how effective it was. He said, there you go again. He said that in response to Carter's attack on Reagan's early opposition to Medicare. And it was a line that said, we're tired of you, Jimmy Carter. He was speaking to the American people. We're tired of you clinging to office. We're tired of your excuses. You're tired of your cheap shots, if you will, or going back into the past. Are you so desperate you have to go after what I said in 1962 or whatever? You know what I mean? It was like, are you that desperate? There you go again. It was a devastating line. I don't know who did it, maybe the president himself, but Governor Reagan himself, but somebody did. It was a brilliant line. And the best part about it is you don't quite get what it means, but you do get what it means. Then he also said, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? That whole riff. And my dad was very taken with it. My dad's a Republican, but he was very taken with that. And I said, as I said in the book, Reagan has said that so many times. He said, I hadn't heard it, but it's taught me a lesson about politics. You have to keep repeating yourself to get everybody to hear it. As Jack Kennedy said, everybody knows what Coca-Cola is. Everybody knows what Coca-Cola tastes like, whether they like it or not. They know it all. So why do they keep advertising? Because the average person doesn't spend their time thinking about Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. And they don't think about politics either. They don't sit around thinking about politics. The junkies do. The real people like me, I guess. But the average person says, I'm worried about food prices. I'm worried about all kinds of things. I'm worried about who's going to win the next football game, my high school game. So I think you learn that too. And I think he said it just enough times. That time in the debate was memorable. And of course, there's a conspiracy theory among the Carter people that Reagan had Carter's debate book. And you can argue that or not, but there certainly was a chief suspect. That was Paul Corbin, the great Kennedy dirty trickster, who was resentful of the fact that Ted Kennedy had been beaten by Jimmy Carter in the primaries. Oh, no, it fits the pattern of Paul Corbin. I knew Corbin. He was ruthless. And he did know people like Bill Casey. He knew how to get the information to the debate prep people. But I don't know if that made any difference. It certainly gave Reagan confidence that he knew what Carter was up to.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I want to jump to, from Carter, you get what, from a staff perspective, is like the quintessential cool and amazing job, and that's chief of staff to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And, there you are in the catbird seat, working for O'Neill, and your job is to take on Ronald Reagan, and you do for 6 years. And I wonder, from that vantage point, and from your experience, what was Reagan's greatest strength? I mean, you went up against him.
Well, first of all, I did a lot of stuff. It was all clean. It was organizing rallies and things like that. I'm very good at organizing rallies behind the scenes. In fact, my favorite line for the speaker was, "Is this one of yours?" Because he wanted to know which one, if I organized his demonstrations and all. I think Tip said, the speaker, I never call him Tip, the speaker said, he was the greatest speech maker from a prepared text he'd ever seen, better than Roosevelt or Kennedy or anybody. Then once he had that text figured out, once he had it to give on TV, he was unstoppable. Now, I stood next to him. Of course, he had great speech writers. As one of them, I respect them as well. Nixon had fabulous speech writers. I mean, he really respected the work of speech writers. And Kennedy, of course. And Roosevelt, he had the brain trust. Sam Roseman, the great former judge up in New York State. These writers are great writers. And Roosevelt would work with them like all great presidents do. They work with their speech writers. But I remember the day that the Challenger horror occurred, when that Christy McAuliffe, I think her name was, they were blown out of the sky in seconds after takeoff. It was horrendous. Peggy Noonan, who's a friend of mine, certainly is a friend of mine now, she went to work on a speech and delivered it to President Reagan. And he delivered it that afternoon, I think around 5, when it was still just cutting into people, especially kids.
In fact, Chris, I want you to finish this thought, but remember that he was supposed to give the State of the Union address that night, and instead gave the speech you're talking about.
Yeah. So I'm standing next to Tip O'Neill, the opposition leader, and he's getting teary-eyed and with Reagan's speech. It was fantastic. It's up there with Ich bin ein Berliner. I mean, it came, I don't know how much work he did on it, but he delivered it majestically. And I like to listen to it again. It's on, you can get it on YouTube, and it's still there, available in the country. One of the great speeches ever. And he gave it that afternoon. So I credit her, I credit him. Peggy had the ability to hear Ronald Reagan speaking. She could hear the voice. She knew his spirit. She knew who he was. Reagan was Reagan because Reagan was a Reagan Democrat in many ways. He was one of the people that liked him. He wasn't some other guy that they liked. It's not like Trump, who was a wealthy guy who picked up some messages from politics and used them. He really wrote those messages himself. He wrote them all through the 50s and 60s and 70s before he got to be president in his columns. So he also thought like a Democrat who was disillusioned. He didn't like the Democratic direction it was going in. And when he talked about taxes, or he talked about big government, or he talked about defense, it was all in his gut. And I think it's easier. It was harder for me as a speechwriter for President Carter because he was very inductive. He wasn't deductive. He didn't have a set of beliefs that you could apply to different situations. So you had to figure them out, and try to figure what does he probably want to say today. And he was much more of a man in the middle than most people thought. I don't think he was much of a liberal. And he was a pacifist too, which I think was probably not the right not the right person to be a president. If you're a pacifist and against use of military weaponry, killing people, I don't think he wanted to do it. I think he was a pure fundamentalist Christian. He did not believe in killing. And that's what I think the mullahs that over in Iran got that message early on, and they knew he was not going to attack. And they figured they had all the time in the world to play games with us and screw with our elections and hold those diplomats. That was an act of war. And in any other country, Reagan's strength was that he sent the message ahead of time. When he sent the message to, from what I understood, from firing the air traffic controllers, who were all engaged in a wildcat strike. In other words, they broke their contract. Dwayne Andrews, head of Archer Daniels Midland, was friendly with Gorbachev. The Russians always have to have one American they like. And he came back and told the speaker that when the Russians saw what he did to that strike, and when he broke it and fired everybody, fired all those workers, they said, this guy's different than Carter. He's for real. And that probably helped Reagan's hand in all his dealings with the Russians, that this guy was tough. Don't mess with him. So you have to establish that ahead of time. You can't go to war with a country and kill hundreds of thousands of people because of a diplomatic dispute. Maybe you can or cannot, but it's much better to scare the hell out of them first so they don't dare do it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Chris, about a critically important moment of the Reagan presidency. And this is something you would have some real insider information on, and it's important. It's in your book. President Reagan is shot. We almost lose the president to an assassin's bullet. He's in the hospital. Speaker O'Neill is the very, very first person to visit with the president when he's able. You write in the book that Jim Baker, Mrs. Reagan, they made arrangements for the speaker to be the first there. Was Speaker O'Neill, was his view, I got to go in, I have to be the one to see the president here, and it was an interest on his part to be with the president, to show the country unified, or no, this was more of a, it was set up by the White House. Yeah, let's have the speaker come over.
No, he didn't.
How did that happen?
I don't think he was cynical about it or even skeptical. I think he had a lot of respect for Jim Baker. Jim Baker was a pro, maybe the best chief of staff ever. This is what wasn't known. He would give the speaker heads up. He'd come up to him and sit in the back room, with Tip's little private room, and tell him what's coming up, just so he wouldn't be caught off guard what was coming up in terms of the president's actions. I think Tip loved that. I love the fact that he was in the know before anybody else. It was generally like that, and he respected Nancy Reagan. Even before I became very friendly with Nancy Reagan after the administration, I became good buddies with her, I think. We did something about the china or the dishware, one of those cheap jokes about the expensive china. And he said, get that out of the speech. He said, get that out of it. And he said, once you make fun of somebody's family member, that's the end. You cannot ever do that. You get a laugh and it's terrible. It gets remembered. So it didn't surprise me that he took them up on this. Of course, this was very early in the administration. This was April, and I think it was April or March. But he did go in there. He did kneel down next to the gurney. According to Max Friedersdorf, who was there, the head of congressional relations. He did recite the 23rd Psalm with the president, who was in very bad shape. I think he was shook at at how bad Reagan was. I think he had bought the outside idea. Well, he took a bullet, but he was telling jokes and everything's okay. I think he was surprised that the president was at death's door and had all that blood lost internally. The bullet had gotten to his heart, pretty much to his heart. He had no idea of how bad it was. And I remember him saying something, this isn't my place. I shouldn't be here. He had that sort of thought of, I'm not close enough this guy personally to be this intimate with him in this fragile moment. You know what I mean? Like, why am I here? After the fact, why am I here? This is a family setting. You know, the deathbed, you don't bring strangers into the deathbed. And, but his behavior, kissing him on the forehead and praying with him, that tells another story too. That wasn't for public consumption. Yeah. That was Tip and his religion and his heart. And I think he liked Reagan too. So they certainly got along all the time. You know, disagree with his politics, but.
Well, you've said something, Chris, in the book. I want to quote you because it ties to something that Reagan said as well. And I wonder if that was the bridge between them. But in the book, you wrote that Speaker O'Neill told you always be able to talk, like leave yourself in a position to be able to talk. And having spoken with a number of Reagan speechwriters, I saw the very same thing where they might write something that looked too personal or that might burn a bridge. And Reagan said, don't ever do that. Don't always leave the ability to go back to the other side. And I wonder if that's potentially how it worked.
Yeah, I think that was the key. It was, you don't see that today.
No.
And Pelosi versus Trump, you don't see that. There's the word liar is used, and I think it's appropriate sometimes, but in this case, but I think if you're a leader, you have to be careful. You're not a commentator on TV. You're not a columnist. You're responsible for co-governing the country. Your job is to co-govern the country with the other side, because it really does. And as long as we live, there's going to be a country about 50-50, and we're going to need the other side to get anything done. So you better keep it talking on good talking terms with the other side, or we'll never get anything done. And so I think that was a good rule. The other was, I thought age, although everybody's so old in politics today, I don't know if anything worked. I mean, everybody's in their late 70s or 80s. And I'm 75. I can't believe it, but I am 75. And I think that sense of late in life urgency, that this is your last act. So why not get some things done and stop positioning yourself and stop using things to make yourself famous? You're already a celebrity. Stop with that. Get some things done, because in the end, you're not going to have much time here. And in most administrations, and we're learning this with the Biden administration, you get about a year at the most, get anything done if you're lucky. And maybe if you get reelected, you get another year. But generally, it's a year. And, you know, and don't blow it by stupid remarks, and don't react to a bad chop from the other side, because you can get them to apologize better than forgive you if you attack them again. And I think it was urgency. That's why I think they fixed the Social Security system, because it was late in the day for these guys. And they fixed the tax system. Imagine this, they got the top rate down to 28% by closing loopholes. So imagine that today. Yeah. And they did some Northern Ireland good stuff. And I'm always proud of the fact that Tip and Bob Michael, the Republican leader, went to Moscow before Reagan met with Gorbachev and laid it down that there's only one president. His name's Ronald Reagan, and he's serious about reducing nuclear weapons. So don't try any fancy stuff through Congress. They're not going to work. And that was pretty patriotic, I thought.
It sure was. I want to cap off this conversation about President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill with a quote, Chris, that you put in your book, because it really, I think, summarizes what you just said. And it's Reagan said, "I'm grateful you have permitted me in the past, and I hope in the future that singular honor, the honor of calling you my friend." He's talking about Tip. And he says, "I think the fact of our friendship is testimony to the political system that we're part of in the country, which permits two not so shy and not so retiring Irishmen to have it out on the issues rather than on each other or their countrymen."
Well, that's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the Irish are good at politics. The Irish are good at politics, and they're good at the blarney, and they love the social aspect of it, and they love the competition. I think those guys being Irish, although different kinds of Irish, Reagan was sort of a Hollywood Irish guy, who could do the Hollywood accents, the Pat O'Brien accents. And Tip actually had that New England accent. But Tip had a million stories. But Reagan did too. These guys were gifted with the ability to remember thousands of stories. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
And Reagan could do it from Hollywood, and he knew them all. And Tip knew them. Tip never forgot his story. I mean, they just loved to just talk, to compete with each other over drinks and just, drink. Tip didn't drink at work. He drank, but Reagan hardly drank at all. And as you know, but they're both raconteurs.
Yeah,
that's probably why they get along. They both want to talk.
All right, now, Chris, I mean, it's a big book. How could it not, of course, cover your, quarter century running Hardball, but your hop across the fence into the world of media was at a time, I think, and you relate this in the book, where, you were one of the very first political pros who made that leap. You said, I want to become a columnist, and then the San Francisco Examiner, and then that grows you eventually into the job at Hardball. But a lot of people in the media at that time really resented it, right? Because you hadn't paid your dues as a journeyman, and didn't talk about that.
Well, I hadn't worked the hallways, and I had worked from inside the rooms. And I was a wise guy back then. I said when somebody was asking about, they're challenging me to write, I said, would you rather hear from the guy who's been in the back rooms or the guy who's been walking down the hallways? And I said, I know more than they know. They didn't like that either. That didn't make it popular at all. People like George Will were very supportive. I think Johnny Apple, Jimmy Breslin definitely was. He took me to a newspaper office, the New York Newsday on 6th Avenue in New York, and he tried to talk Don Forrest, the editor there, to give me a column. He did that personally. George Will called me twice. He called back and said, you got to begin this. You got to do this. So the ones that are still around, I mean, Breslin was inimitable, and certainly George Will is unbelievable. And I learned the top guys had no threat for me, but the ones that had slots, but not particularly talented people, were afraid of me. I think there's a good point there. I think we have to decide, do we want to be commentators, advocates, partisan advocates, or we want to be newscasters? Are we just going to report the news? I really think that you'd have to be sure. I'd like to see a little thing below everybody when they go on television. Straight news, opinion news. Because even if they're both honest, there's a certain taint, if you will, to a point of view person. Even if they're doing facts, they can spin those facts the way they want. And I think there's a difference. I played both. I would do Sunday pieces for the San Francisco Examiner and magazine covers that were straight, and then I would have an opinion column. So I agree with the people I respect now. To make your point, I think it is your point. I look at people who are straight reporters now with tremendous admiration, whether they are Yamiche Alcindor on PBS or Bob Costa on PBS or at the Washington Post or Michael Schmidt of the New York Times. I think, or Maggie Haberman. These are tough. Cronkite was able to be. I interviewed him when he retired. After he retired, I said, "You're a liberal, aren't you?" He said, "Yeah, I'm a liberal." But he also was a great reporter with only a little tinge of prejudice. But I would notice the little tinges because I'm a pro at this. I remember the way he pronounced Barry Goldwater was like Barry Goldwater is some crazed insect, Barry Goldwater said today, "Okay, I know where you stand, Walter Cronkite." But he was so trustworthy that people, when he came out against the Vietnam War and said, "We can't win," it'll end in stalemate after the 1968, after the Tet Offensive by the North Vietnamese. And he came out and said, it's unwinnable. Johnson said, "We've lost Cronkite, we've lost the country." Yeah. It didn't take, military guys wouldn't tell we'd lost. They all, based on all the papers, Pentagon papers, I think we all knew, they all knew, Kennedy knew, they all knew we couldn't win. And they kept sending guys in there to get killed. It's horrible.
Yeah.
They should have said, it's easy. Nobody wanted to be the guy to lose the first American war.
Yeah. I want to take you back to Hardball before we close out. And I know you're going to say it's not possible that I don't have a single one, but what was your most memorable interview on Hardball? Your most memorable, and the one you look back on and you kind of regret the most. That
okay, I'll give you two good ones. John McCain and Barack Obama, and John McCain down at Clemson. It was one of our Hardball College Tour events. The kids were going crazy. He had just won in New Hampshire. We thought he could win. We're all rooting for him. I was hanging out with Lindsey Graham, who's his big booster in those days. And imagine we sat down next to some old railroad tracks out way in the boonies of South Carolina, having spaghetti at his old hangout, Lindsey's old hangout. The kids were going crazy. I thought it was just rock and roll. I love that. I was in Westchester University in 2008, which is surrounding Philadelphia, big university, great music department and everything. And I arrived early, and my daughter was going to the University of Pennsylvania, Caroline, our daughter. And I couldn't find her in the crowd. So this is something that's incidental, but it gets to my heart. And it shows you the mood the country was in 2008. I'm looking around and I keep looking at different parts of this big crowd of people in the stands. And I go, is my daughter Caroline here? And every time I go to address a group of African-American women, young women, would yell, I'm here. They're joking. It was that light about race, which is always so touchy a subject in this country, and should be, but for historic reasons. But everybody was in such a positive mood. They thought it'd be funny that they could say, here I am.
Yeah, that's neat.
And it was wonderful. And I think that spoke to the kind of mood he created in the campaign. It was just upbeat. And I always liked interviewing him. I wish I could have gotten to Churchill, although I'm sure the British class system might have hit me kind of hard, because we think of him as one of us when we're no near. He was aristocratic as hell. But yeah, I think I like the Obama interview because he was so smart. And yeah, and I liked McCain. We all like McCain. We're all Democrats. A lot of the media people are Democrats. Everybody knows that. But everybody rooted for him.
Yeah,
maybe because he went to Vietnam. He went to Vietnam and we didn't. And he suffered and we didn't. How could you not look up to that?
Yeah, I had a ton of respect for him too. I was a delegate for Senator McCain, so I know of what you speak. I do. I sensed, Chris, you named so many people in this book, and I don't mean just those that you interviewed. I mean those that seem to have helped you on the ladder on the way up. And I wonder if that was kind of your way of saying thank you to them.
Yeah. Well, I also want to recognize the fact that you better have those people. Yeah. That Senator Frank Moss, we had a new aide come in and I got pushed out for a while, and I ran for Congress. He brought me back, made the case for me with Senator Muskie, got me on the first staff of the Senate Budget Committee when it was just beginning. He stuck his neck out for me. Dick Pettigrew, the former speaker down in Florida, took me to the White House. Rick Hertzberg made me a speechwriter for the president. Bob Schiffer, who I worked with in a campaign in Brooklyn, spent every weekend basically working on my campaign. So did Rich Sorensen. So I've had people that have helped me all along the line. And sure, I remember, I think of a lot of other people, that did this for me.
So you wrote in on this new wave in the media business with cable news. Now, here you are in your 70s, and there's this thing called social media, and everybody, if you hold a phone in your hand, you've become a worldwide publisher, right? How do you feel about all this energy and the movement in that direction?
Well, not well, because what I liked was having an editor, whether it's Phil Bronstein or Gail Benzinger or somebody else at the San Francisco Examiner. So when I did my long weekend pieces, I'd turn them in late afternoon Friday. They were for Sunday's paper. And about an hour later, I'd hear back from Gail usually, and she'd say, just two questions. Who's this source? Who's that source? Who's this? How about this fact? And I'd answer it and says, but apart from that, good piece. Hung up. Or it's all right. I love that because it showed that I was being edited. And I think you need an editor. I don't think people blogging or putting out web pages. The thing about TV is scary. Is the joke about TV is, It doesn't matter what you wear on radio or what you say on television, because there's nobody checking the facts. I mean, there's nobody calling you up and say that's wrong. The New York Times, whatever you think of it, it's a great paper, has a corrections page every day, a whole bunch of corrections. TV doesn't have that. You think there's more mistakes made at the New York Times than are made on cable TV every night? You got to be kidding. Of course, there are mistakes made, and no big X comes up over the screen and says wrong. You know.
Yeah.
So it is people. It's your first draft of the news, history, and nobody's checking it.
Yeah.
I do worry about that. But as I said, even facts can be manipulated. Facts can be manipulated. I like what it said in the courtrooms in the old days watching TV, Perry Mason. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. So no speculation, no conspiracy theories, no theories. And the whole truth, which is, if you're going to have a big spending infrastructure program with trillions of dollars, it's going to cause inflation. That's an economic fact. You get more dollars, more dollars chasing fewer goods and services. The same with crime. If you pull the police officers back, if you intimidate them from doing their jobs, you're going to have more crime. The criminal crowd out there are watching this every day. These cops are afraid of us. They're afraid of shooting their guns. They're not going to come into a club at 2:00 in the morning. They're not going to do a domestic relations situation if they can avoid it. They'll be thinking, when am I getting off? When am I getting home tonight? Alive.
No doubt.
It's common sense. And so what you want when you dial 911, especially if you live in a tough neighborhood, somebody good and courageous to show up, who's willing to risk their life for you. That's what you want. You don't want a busy signal, or you don't want to have a message that says, we have underfunded the police in this precinct. We can't afford to send anybody tonight. What?
Yeah.
That's common sense. Common sense. So, but the whole truth. Black lives is important, but so is good police.
Yeah. Chris, we're going to run out of time. So last question. I have this theory that America seems so divided, and it has been for some time. And it's almost like we have to have a national tragedy, a national crisis, whether it's 9/11, Pearl Harbor, or some kid falls down a well, for America to be able to come together. Do you see this nation coming together again in some way from your perch right now? And is it possible?
Well, President Reagan, when he was president, talked about his imaginings about if somebody came here from another planet, it would unite us. And that certainly would be the case if it was a war of the worlds. Short of that, I thought in the months after 9/11, before we got, I believe, diverted into that war with Iraq, I thought we really were a one country. There was a this country, as Harry Truman used to say, a this country. I felt it on the subway in New York. I felt it when the fire engines would drive by the yuppies on their sidewalk cafes, and they would all cheer the firemen. It was a cross-class line. It was fantastic. And I thought that the people of working class and the people of privilege, of economic and academic privilege, we're not at war anymore. There was a sense of, we are in this together, we're being threatened, and we have courageous people like the firefighters who climbed I spoke at the the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick in New York 2 months later, and I just started listing names, and everybody stood because they knew what I meant. I listed the names of the Irish American guys who died fighting that, climbing up the stairs when everybody was climbing down the World Trade Towers, and the courage of the people that came from the working areas of Queens and Brooklyn and just raced over there so they could save lives. We have that in them. We have that in us. And what good person doesn't want it back? What good person? Some people don't want it back. They love this fight. Don't kid yourself, John. There are people on the hard left and the hard right who love this vicious division in our country because it lights them up with all their resentments. But I think people who are reasonably happy people want to have their country to be happy. That's what I think.
Yeah. Okay. Chris Matthews, just a terrific book, and my gosh, a terrific life. It's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you, Chris. Really, just those very special moments, and I can't thank you enough for writing such a great book.
And thank you for the Reagan Library. It's a great place. It's a great place, a great heritage. Thank you so much, John.
Take care, Chris.
Thank you for joining us for today's virtual programming event. We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.